Britt Hartley, welcome to the show.
So glad to be here.
So, the way I discovered you, and I was graced actually with what you do, was one of my supporters actually posted something on our internal chat and said, "Hey, have you seen this person? She seems right up your alley." And I was like, "Oh yeah, man. People send me stuff all the time, and it's always something kooky new age stuff or something that I understand why they think it might resonate, but it doesn't." And so I went to, it was Instagram. It was something, it was transferred from TikTok. And I watched you talk about the nature of reality in a way that like at first I was like, oh yeah, emptiness, no self, whatever. And then the rabbit hole just opened. And the way that you expressed was so amazing that I didn't even go and look at other stuff. I was like, okay, I have to email her right now. I didn't realize you had like 300,000 followers on TikTok and were such a big deal. I was like, no, I just have to reach out. Otherwise, I might have been a little intimidated. I still am. But so I reached out and you were so gracious, immediately responded, and we got on a Zoom call. And I tell you, that was one of the most amazing calls. Like immediately we were talking about these these beautiful topics that humans don't often discuss. Like what happens when you leave religion? What happens when you encounter this deep nihilism that can be part of the journey when you realize everything you thought was true about reality isn't? All the support you got from social structures and religion and groups and belief has fallen away. And what is it like to have the feminine aspect of this show up? We talk about men going into the jungle and doing ayahuasca, but we never talk as much about the female aspects of spiritual embodiment. What's it like to be a skeptic, an atheist, and still deeply spiritual and deeply honoring these ancient traditions and the ancient wisdom found in all religions? So that led me to you, and I'm just so glad you said yes. So I say we take it from here and I'll stop talking. I'll stop being such a fanboy.
I loved our jam session. I went away thinking like, oh, that was just such an enjoyable conversation. And just to introduce myself a little bit, my name is Britt Hartley, and I'm an atheist spiritual director, which already out of the gate is going to bring up some questions and some things that we can talk about. I have an almost doctorate degree in theology, so at a Christian seminary, and my focus was in the future of American religion. So I have a master's degree in applied theology in the future of American religion. And really the center of that education process was, okay, people are deconstructing from religion. I myself left Mormonism over a decade ago and had a deconstruction process with that. And I was really curious about where is this going, and wanting some more tools for the things that I was facing, as you said, as I was deconstructing religion, which had kept all these existential fears at bay that I was now facing for the first time as an adult without tools. And I've spent, the better part of my adult life seeking out these questions and dabbled in, history and philosophy and religion and spirituality to try to gain tools for really recovering from nihilism. And when I say nihilism, I really mean the pessimistic side of nihilism, the what is the point of life side of nihilism that I encountered after my deconstruction of religion and the death of God, and finished, my education, finished some of those journeys, did a 2-year program in spiritual direction, and now I work as an atheist spiritual director, which is how can I help you find spiritual tools that science says are good tools, but do it without any dogma, do it without any faith, do it without any claims about the metaphysics of reality that we just don't know yet. Because as someone who has left religion, especially something, as intense as Mormonism, I don't want to ever have to jump through hoops of belief and faith in order to get the tool. I just want the tool. And when I started being an atheist spiritual director, I didn't know if a single person would be interested in what I do. And I found that we're in a meaning crisis, and that there's millions of people like me who can't quite show up at church, but want tools, are overwhelmed with kind of the claims in the spiritual world, are struggling with existential fears. We have 4 existential fears death, meaninglessness, isolation, and fear of freedom, have no tools to deal with that. We have Gen Z, who is, experiencing these high rates of anxiety and depression and meaninglessness as institutions begin to crumble. And I found that there were so many who were like me that wanted to hold on to their skepticism, wanted to hold on to rationality, wanting to bring this conversation into the 21st century, but we're also in need of tools. And so this is the place that I hang out now, just kind of the intersection of science and spirituality. And it definitely has improved the quality of my life.
I love it so much. There's so much there. Like each sentence of what you just said could be an entire show, and it's almost a struggle to figure out where to begin. But let me back a bit up here and say what you've kind of described is the kind of hero or heroine's journey that many of us undertake in our own lives, but also that it seems the generations have undertaken in a way. So you have the older generation, the greatest generation, the silent generation, who were more in that structured, religious, kind of more dogma. And I'm assuming when you say faith, you're referring to faith in the form of, I believe something that's been told to me about the nature of reality or the truth, and I believe it on faith. Is that right? When you talk about faith?
Yeah, faith just being a moral virtue in general, which is something that I struggled with even as a believer, that faith, there's this claim in religion that faith is a moral virtue where you kind of put blinders on, you don't think about this, you don't doubt these things, this is true. And the thing about faith is for most religions, there are, and I'm saying this as an atheist, I'm not saying this as someone who's trying to convert you to something, but there are tools that religions carry: ritual, community, story, moral education. Now, do they do these things great? Maybe not. We can have that discussion. But they do carry tools, and we have science that says that if you had religion or spirit or beliefs during COVID, you fared better than people who don't. There are actual tools in this vessel. But in order to get those tools, the entry to that is you need to believe that Jesus is coming again. You need to believe that the Quran was written by God and it is perfect. You need to believe XYZ. And I'm saying, okay, there seems to be some actual tools here in this boat. Can I rescue those tools without having to play the faith game and the dogma game, because those are going to be dangerous to us individually and also collectively as our truths are bumping into each other.
Beautiful. And so this is the kind of journey as I see it, and the intersection of that is, we start out when we're young with a kind of almost a magical thinking where we actually will take things on faith, what our parents tell us, what's told to us, what's conditioned to us. And it's almost necessary to form that phase then, and the community around it and the structure and the discipline. And then as we start to hit adolescence, we do question, like for me, and I'm sort of projecting my own feeling. I was raised as a Zoroastrian, which is this ancient, religion. And I had my equivalent of a bar mitzvah called a naujot. And, the priests are chanting over you. You have to say these prayers, ritual, prayer, tying these sacred garments and wearing them, and you have to believe that there's a single God, and it has this, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, this kind of dogma. And the faith there is being told there is this God, you will be judged when you die, this. So that was the definition of faith that I grew up with. Then I hit adolescence and I'm questioning everything. I'm learning science and something doesn't sit right. And suddenly there's a void here. There's nothing. There's no God. How can there be? It doesn't make any rational sense. So you reach that rational kind of skepticism, which then leads to this real, yes, atheism for sure, question everything, but then there's nothing that atheism will do there to fill that hole of meaninglessness, perceived meaninglessness. So then there was a kind of thing that happened with me on the journey where I realized the word faith took on a different meaning. Instead of believing what someone's told me, faith meant I've actually experienced something in reality about the nature of reality through my own investigation of this moment that is so clear and can't be put in words that it generates a faith, a knowing from experience that something is true and I don't know why and I can't talk about it. And then it becomes this quest to try to figure what that out is. And like you said, we don't have the tools typically in our rationalist atheist world to do that. So how do we then come into almost a faith, transrational place, which you've one of the terms you used was rational mysticism, which I love. I love that. Or secular, mysticism. And your book is called No Nonsense Spirituality, which is just perfect. Like, what is spirituality? It's this trying to figure out what is this, and that knowing that generates the faith that I'm defining is so different. And how do we explore that in community too? Because we are humans and we're wired for that. And there's nothing set up for it except for sort of these buckets of like New Age stuff and the occult and those kind of things, which have their aspects, right, of reality. But then they make these truth claims that are like crazy. Like, well, if the planets align a certain way, then you're going to behave a certain way. And it's like, well, wait a minute now. How is that any different than saying Jesus just made it like this? So yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on this.
Yeah, there was a lot there that I could pull apart, but really my approach is kind of a Venn diagram of the benefits of science and skepticism and reason. But as you say, atheism as an ism has nothing to offer by nature. By the nature of that ism, it has nothing to offer. If you say, how should I raise my children? What is the meaning of life? Blah, blah, blah. The only thing atheism can say is not a theistic God. That is all that it has to offer the conversation. And so what we're finding, especially as people are leaving religion and as Gen Z is really growing up without religion, is that we used to have problems with too much order, too much structure, too much hierarchy, too much colonialism, too much all of that. And now we have a different kind of monster, which is too much chaos, which is people not being able to go to church, but people missing out on tools that actually improve your quality of life and not knowing how to get those. And so for me, the best way to go about this is this Venn diagram approach of science. We never check rationalism at the door. It's always at the table, but also that there are tools even driven by science in religion, things like ritual that you mentioned. We have a science of rituals. We have science of awe. We have science of, moments of transcendence. Now, can we make big claims about reality with some of those experiences? Maybe not. We don't know enough yet. But as you say, we can value the experience for the nature of those experiences. And then we have the occult world, which is really growing, especially with Gen Z and especially with women, which is intuitive. It's the tarot cards, it's the astrology. And some of these tools are actually helpful for a conversation between your conscious and subconscious mind. If you have a tarot card and you're asking questions, and that can actually be a useful tool, but I don't have to believe that the universe spun in such a way that only that card would have shown up that day, because now you have to make not a lot of scientific claims to back up something like that. But I can use this as an intuitive tool. And so how can I get the benefits of the occult world, this intuitive female nature side, the benefits of religion and spirituality, all of the wisdom that's been housed in the houses of religion, and still keep my skepticism, keep my science, really be aware of cognitive biases, really be aware of, peer-reviewed studies, all the things, and put them together and see what comes out. And what we get is some strong science of spirituality. I talk a lot about Lisa Miller. She's this lead scientist at the University of Columbia. She's the leader of the science of spirituality. She's been doing studies on the science of spirituality for 30 years. And we know now that if spirituality were a pill, if it was a pill that you could take, it would be our most effective pill against risky behaviors, against depression, against, if you have depression and you find spirituality, it's the number one indicator that you're not going to go through another deep depression spell again. I mean, we have some real science here saying that there's something good happening here, but it's not happening on the pews for Gen Z. We have some problems with religion. We have some problems with, first century, 7th century truth claims that are making problems for everyone. But there's a baby in this bathwater worth saving. And so that's what I'm really interested in for myself and for my children, and also just for the world, as I'm seeing that it's not just me who got stuck in the meaning crisis or had some suicide ideation, because it's like, what is even the point of this? This is all an illusion. The hardest, if I'm being honest, the hardest thought that I ever had when I was really deep in my nihilism phase was the thought that If all of this is an illusion and life is just suffering and this is a machine that I did not consent to, and just to live, just to be alive, I have to kill conscious life at some level in order to sustain life. And this is just this evolutionary machine, then the most moral thing to do is to withdraw my consent from this machine. And I was stuck there for over a year of just really battling with this thought of, is life fundamentally worth living? And I was able to shift away from that and really live a life now of intentionality, of experience, versus thinking about how is my life worth it over over a grand spectrum. Maybe it's not, but there is value in the experience of being alive, and tools of spirituality can really help awaken that to the point that even though I know I'm going to die, I'm really happy for the ride right now. I'm really happy to be having this conversation. I'm having a hell of a time. And that was a big shift for me. And it was really secular spirituality that helped me to make that shift without having to believe in anything unbelievable, which is what I needed because, I was raised in religion and I didn't want to play that game anymore.
What you're saying is so resonant, and I think with a lot of people who are listening, the struggle with this conversation, Britt, it's funny. When we first had our conversation on the phone, we were just going off on all the, just like, oh my God, you too? Yes, this. And here it's like, there's so much depth to everything that's said that it's almost a paralysis of where to even go next. So I'm going to pick something and we're going to dive in because there's a lot. Okay. One of the things you said was talking about the aspects of the occult, like say tarot cards or these mystical experiences that people can have, that you don't have to believe the truth claims that have sprung up over the years where humans like to make explanations around why and what and how, but that it's actually occurring. Like you can have a direct subconscious experience that wasn't perceived, be perceived in a way, this almost Jungian kind of shadow that is perceived. And by its mere perception, you've turned something that was dark into the light and integrated it in a way. And these are all concepts too, but it's so powerful. So what you said about the advent of having a spirituality being correlated with better outcomes for depression and things like that, it totally makes sense, because instead of avoiding those parts of our own experience that we've repressed, we're integrating them in ways that are beyond our ability to discuss with concept, which is only one tool. That's the sort of science rational side, which is perfect. So it's an integral approach. I guess Ken Wilber would call it a kind of integral level approach where it's yes and to this, yes and to this. And you see the shadow in each thing, like the truth claims or the abuses of power in the religious hierarchical constructions, which we hear about on the news all the time, and why people might leave that. And then looking at the shadow of atheism, say, in that nihilistic evolutionary machine model. And so what's left is the kind of indescribable kind of knowing of what this is, but then with all the tools available, with a yes and to kind of everything. So, but doing that requires something that I think a lot of people are afraid to do now in that context, which is getting actually help, getting help from people who've been through it, who've been through the journey and that kind of thing. And that's where, like, I think I look at your website and I'm like, oh my gosh, like if I was struggling with this, leaving a religion or going through that deep year of nihilism that you had with the suicidal ideation. And this is so common. Like people close to me have had this. Myself, like I went through the nihilism when I was much younger in my teens and kind of somehow got through it by telling myself a story that, even underneath this mechanistic machine of a universe, there's something there that I don't understand that is truer than all that. And I feel it, but I don't know what it is. And that was enough to get me through. But I tell you, when you really feel that empty, because it can be seen like, whoa, this really is an illusion. Well, so then what are you left with, right? When the mind is grasping, it's like, I need meaning. I knew everything I knew is gone. And it's really the mind doing that. So you can see how even I'm struggling. Like, I don't know where the question is here, Britt.
Yeah.
I'm just going to toss it back to you.
Yeah. It's such a knife's edge because we have these cognitive biases that really want us to be special, really want us to find creative ways to not have to think about death. We find stories that give us meaning, give us some kind of eternal meaning. And so it is difficult to kind of weave your way through. But we know that even just at the scientific level, we know that there are states of mind and states of consciousness that are less neurotic than others. We can look at the minds of long-term meditators and see that they're kind of evolved, neurotic, negative thinking. That part of their brain is very small. It doesn't light up very much. The interconnected, we can actually watch this happen in the brain. So it's not just woo. And that's what I have to convince atheists of. So I have to convince atheists that there's some science behind this. And it's not just woo. I have to convince the occult people that, hey, you're sneaking in and you're smuggling in a lot of truth claims and getting really scientific. And I have to convince the religious people that you can have these tools without the dogma. And all three groups are mad at me all the time, but that's okay because, this is just a game. And
welcome to my world.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And so it's this knife edge of trying to get the best tools, the best wisdom to be able to experience these states of consciousness, to be able to experience all the benefits of spirituality with the least amount of downside, the least amount of dogma, the least amount of cognitive dissonance, the least amount of kind of repressing your rationality. We don't have to do that in order to have spiritual lives where we are awake and we are intentional and we are living kind of at the level of experience. And you've said that word a couple times, experience, because that really is the key. If you read any philosopher who talked about nihilism, you could read even like Viktor Frankl or Albert Camus or Nietzsche. If you read Simone de Beauvoir, any of these guys will talk about this shift into experience, that yes, scientifically, we can say that love is the release of dopamine in this part of your brain, blah, 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 blah. And logically, we can write papers about it. But because we are conscious, because we are alive, because there is conscious experience, the feeling of love, the feeling of being kind of emotionally naked in front of someone else and someone looking at you with love in their eyes and kind words and being accepted in that place. You can write papers about that, but it is very different than the experience of being in that place. And we can write papers about psychedelics, very different to experience. We can write papers about what is actually going on with reality. But because we are conscious, because we have that quality of experience, there's a different way that we can be where it's not so dependent on trying to avoid the fact that we're going to die. It's not so dependent on how does my life have meaning a million years from now? Well, it doesn't. Logically, maybe it doesn't. But the fact is, I'm alive in this body. And sometimes when you speak, my body buzzes, it resonates. I don't know why, that's magic. And sometimes my child lays on my chest. And if you feel that, I can read a paper about that, but feeling that is a totally different experience. And so you can still enjoy the ride of what it is to have the lights on, that we won the lottery. We got to experience, and we're not even a plant. We actually get to get up and walk around and talk to other humans about what the hell is going on here. And we're spinning through space and somehow we're talking over Zoom. And all of a sudden, at the level of experience, life becomes magic again. And this is what I try to convince atheists and nihilists that, hey, we can still face harsh truths about reality. We don't have to hide from those. We can still face those eyes wide open, but at the level of experience, there's still magic. And I missed that when I was in my nihilistic phase, when I was really just kind of in this rational logic space of the death of God and meaninglessness and all of this, but shifting into experience and having spiritual tools that help me to do that was a totally different way of being. And it's what the mystics talk about. Mysticism, we've said this word a couple times, so let me just define some terms. When I say spirituality, I just mean connection to self and connection to outside of self. For some people, that includes a divine, a God. For me, that doesn't. And for mysticism is the experience of that state of consciousness, of oneness, where you're not neurotic, where you're not self-obsessed, where you're just in the experience of being. And religion puts all these, dogmas and things around it, but mysticism really is just the value of the experience itself. And so I don't have to understand consciousness or make grand truth claims about the universe to say this experience was valuable as an experience at the level of experience. And that's what mystics do. And I want to be able to offer those tools, but just in a 21st century context. I just said a bunch of words at you.
I'm so in the moment with you as you express like that. And what you said about the body lights up, the body actually is like a receptor. It's this big energetic receptor. And when you point at reality in that way, it lights up all the cells for me, because I know this to be true, because here we are, like we're sharing this present moment now, and it's indescribable. It's inconceivable. It's beyond the concepts. The concepts arise in it. And in this space, even nihilism is just a word. Even meaning is just a word. The meaning is this. It is infinitely significant because it's happening consciously. We are aware. Everything you said is absolutely true. And I want to tell a quick story relating to this because it's recent. This month, my father passed away, and that's why we were going to do an interview 2 weeks ago. And I emailed you, and I'm really sorry. And here, okay, how do I say this? I have to be very precise with how I'm talking because it's something that's very hard to talk about. But there is a lot of dogma around death. There's a lot of fear of death, and a lot of it exists in belief, in thought, in conditioning, in our culture, in our religions. So what happens when that drops? What is this? So my father was 84. He was sick. We spoke before he went to the emergency department on a Sunday night. My mother was taking care of him at home. They lived alone in this ranch where I grew up in the Central Valley of California. And I've told this story elsewhere, but like we've had these last few years to really connect on a level that I'm so grateful that we were able to do that. And he saw me meditating and going on retreat, and he would ask me, "Why do you want to spend all your time sitting in silence like that? Like, what is it?" And I remember I asked him, I was like, "Well, Dad, are you afraid of death?" And he said, he had to sit and think about it a bit. And he said, yeah, I guess I am. And I said, well, partially that's the reason I sit, because that fear of death has driven so much of my behavior. And yet when I sit, it's not like that at all. It's this. And I could tell he got what I was saying. And so the long story short was that night he called, he said, "I think I need to go to the emergency department, et cetera." I had a conversation with him, doctor to doctor, and very direct and about his wishes and that. Then he went. Then my mother calls me at 3 a.m. The ER doctor says that he's not going to survive the night. Who knows what he's had, a heart attack or some congestive heart failure. And immediately I felt a rush of emotion, and then it passed. It was the pure emotion of, oh my gosh, your father is dying in a hospital 3.5 hours away from where you are. Is he suffering? And all the thoughts that bubble up. And then those thoughts disappeared. And it was like, okay. I made sure that my mom let them know that what his wishes were, that he didn't want aggressive stuff. And I said, okay, it's 3 a.m. I'm going to sit in my meditation chair and I'm going to create a space where there's only this. And I know he's in this space, in this present moment, in this hospital, but there's no distance. It's just this. And I was there, and it felt like he and I were there together. And it wasn't a he and I, it was just this. And at some point I felt this amazing expansion and release, like this thing that just went zoom and expanded into infinity. And it felt like bliss right in the chest. And I was like, he just passed. 10 or 15 minutes later, my mother called crying and said, they just called and said he just passed. And listen, you can talk about placebo effect. You can talk about mind generating these things. You could talk about unconscious belief that created this space where I thought he had passed because I knew scientifically he was in his final hours. None of that matters. What I experienced was so direct, so indescribable, and so real that my experience of his death was absolutely one of gratitude, equanimity, and peace. even when the strongest feelings of loss, like I've lost my daddy, like this person who was with me at my birth, who, taught me everything I know, those feelings come and you cry and they're gone. And then the next thing is happening. But underneath it is a feeling of perfection, of peace, of gratitude. How could I have accessed that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was in my head, neurotic, thinking about the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, constantly mired in belief, thinking death was this conceptual demon? Like, it's impossible. So having that journey, having taken that journey before, and some of it with him, was a true blessing and a gift. And what you're talking about is giving people in an atheistic kind of society, increasingly secular society, where Gen Z has fallen off the cliff of meaning because we used to inflict meaning from outside. And then now they can't seem to find it because we have no substitute for it. And you're saying, actually, you just look right here, and here are some tools. And I think it's absolutely perfect and beautiful.
There was so much there. We talked off air for a second about how facing death, even and facing existential fears, is hard. Your ego's gonna die multiple times. Like you're just gonna die along the way, right? And you just have to kind of make peace with that. But the benefit of going through and facing death before you die, there's just so many benefits to it on the other side of that. And we know from terror management theory now how much our brains are trying to avoid that we're gonna die. And that we can just watch our behavior change. If we have all these studies that if you remind people of death, that they're going to die in the morning, their behavior changes in very interesting ways. People start to think about their legacy. There's just really fascinating studies about all the different ways that we try to avoid death. But the benefit of facing these things head on is that you build the tools to be able to sit with the grief and not shy away from it. That there was beauty in that relationship between the two of you, and it's even more sacred because it ends, because he's gone now, right? And it just focuses you. And we know from terror management studies that the people who face death, there's all these benefits. There's benefits to taking more risks into authenticity. You care more about your relationships. You do things more intentionally. You're less likely to be on your deathbed and say, like most people say, I didn't really live. I wish I would have been more courageous. I wish I would have spent more time with my friends. I wish I would have XYZ, because you've already died and you kind of are facing that head on. And so for me, I have skulls and memento mori and things all around me that remind me that I'm going to die, but it's not morbid. It's really just facing what is and sitting with what is and still experiencing the magic of, but I'm alive right now. There are times that if I wake up grumpy and I wake up on the wrong side of the bed and I'm just being neurotic about this or that, I'll do a death meditation where I will imagine myself on my deathbed. I've lost everything. I've lost all my friends. I've lost my mind. I've lost my body. It's at the end. And you really go through this death meditation. And it's the first times you do it, it's very scary. It's terrifying. But then I get to jump into today. Oh my God. I'm 38 today. My kid just came in my room and she's 6 and she's not going to be 6 for very much longer. Oh my God, I get to eat eggs and toast. It's so delicious. And the sun is shining today and it just completely changes your day because you started your day on your deathbed and you got to wake up to today. And so really a lot of the benefits of spirituality and mysticism is facing these fears directly rather than taking what religion offers, which is just this collective drug. If I went to a Mormon funeral, for example, we all take this collective drug that they're with Jesus now and everything's going to be okay. We sing the same songs for everyone. We tell the same story for everyone. We go through this 45-minute ritual routine. We put them in their temple clothes. We bury them. We sing the song, and we all just kind of bypass those feelings. And so what religion has to offer usually is some kind of spiritual bypassing. You get this in the occult world too sometimes with past lives and future lives and other things that we can't know. But rather than kind of take that empty calorie kind of pill, that spiritual bypassing pill, we can actually face these things. And when we have tools to face these existential fears, you can actually live a life that is intentional, that is beautiful, that is the life that you want to live, even in the face of harsh truths, without having to ignore them or create a story where it's all okay. And that to me is the sweet spot, is because I don't have to turn my rational brain off. I can still face things in science that are sometimes hard, because I lost God, I lost my community, I lost free will, I lost a sense of self. I mean, I was really losing all of my psychological and social anchors. And in that place, we do need tools, we do need help, but it doesn't need to be that pill of the story or the rituals that just kind of bypass the harsh truths of reality. Let's keep the harsh truths of reality, but actually shift our life to meet those. And that's when my life really changed. And that's when I really went from wanting to die and for years, like waking up and wanting to be dead, to a life that I live now where it is so focused on how I want to be experiencing this lottery of being that, even though things aren't perfect and it's chaos and life is hard and all the things, I'm still so glad that I'm awake right now. I'm still so glad to wake up today and get to experience all the things that I get to experience today. And that shift just really saved my life.
Oh, it's beautifully expressed. Yeah. One of the things that arose in what you just spoke about, this idea that we don't need an external moral arbiter in the form of God to tell us what the next right thing is. We don't even need to believe that we have free will in this sense. Whether, a scientist will tell you free will is not what you think. It is the spontaneous causes and conditions of the universe. But there's an even deeper knowing of free will that can happen where even the question of free will falls away because everything is perfectly unfolding in a way that the next right thing is you eat that egg sandwich, or you turn 38 and your daughter's looking at you. And that is the perfection of all of this showing up in this moment perfectly. Now, one of the things you mentioned on this is this bypass, that religion offers a kind of spiritual bypass where it says you don't have to feel the incredible loss or the incredible emotions that come up with a loss of a human or a close relative or someone you love, when we can come up with this sort of a opioid, which is now they're actually in heaven and here's a bunch of beliefs that will distance you from the feelings. There is actually, religion isn't the only way that can happen. Even in these sort of non-duality type of spiritual traditions like Vedanta, Buddhism, you see a ton of mostly men on YouTube talking about emptiness. Well, there is no self, there is no free will, everything is radiant emptiness happening perfectly, and you're not in control of it. And so, but I'm having these personal problems. I'm feeling this horrible loss. No, that's a story. And the truth is, it's all an illusion. So none of that matters. So what are you upset about? Just feel the upsetness and let it go. And to me, not only it's a very masculine approach. It's this disintegrative approach that says, I'm actually going to use this thing almost as another belief. You have to believe now that everything is an illusion, that there's emptiness, and that your lived experience in a way is not to be fully inhabited as a human. It's to be seen as empty, impermanent, a phantom. And even the Buddha didn't say that. In the Heart Sutra, it says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. There's no birth and death, and there's no end of them. That's the beautiful paradox of being a human is, yeah, it's an illusion. Yeah, it's emptiness. Also, I hurt right now. Also, I've lost somebody. And that's the integration that when you mentioned the feminine awakening, the aspect of femininity that isn't so often expressed now in the world of YouTube beyond the sort of occult aspects, right? The integrative feminine approach, which is so embodied, it says, yeah, that's true. But also, my God, look at my daughter. Look at her right there. She's indescribable. And she's part of me. No, and you can't argue with that.
Hmm. Yeah, there was a couple things there I want to pull out, and certainly the occult world and the Instagram guru world sneaks in its own kind of truth claims, and a lot of that from the male side is really about transcending the body, and we get that in Christianity. It's more about kind of repressing the body, that the body is kind of the natural man, but you have this soul, and you kind of need to overcome the body. In some of these other spiritual spaces, you need to transcend the body, and this is where you get, these long periods of fasting. This is where you get what I call ice bath bros, which is they're up at 5, they're taking the ice bath, and then they walk in the sunshine, and then they stand and do their grounding, and then they do their box breathing, and then they do this and that, and then they travel, or they go to India. Yeah, we can talk about that. And then they go to India and they sit on a mat for 3 weeks and think about love. And then when they come back, we give them a microphone because they're so amazing and they're so spiritual. And this is where we're missing the feminine voice, because the feminine mystics, female mystics, and just the feminine side of this conversation has always been embodied spirituality, because women are relational, and spirituality has to be on the go and in their lives. It's very sad working with so many women that if I ask them, do you have a spiritual practice? Do you have some kind of contemplative, thing that you're drawn to? And 9 times out of 10, they say this: I've tried to meditate. I'm bad at it. My kids are running around. I can't get into it. I'm just not spiritual. 9 times out of 10 over the past decade, that's what a woman will say to me. And it's because there's this idea that even outside of religion, men are still the dominant spiritual voice. And when men define spirituality, it's still very much a doing, an action. We do these things in order to get into these states. And when you add the female mystic's voice, they'll say these really humbling things like, oh, I felt that before I was doing the dishes. I felt that before I was in the car in traffic. And it's like, that's the flex, not having to continually going on retreat, not continually having to do these psychedelic combinations. It's great that you sat on a mat in India for 3 weeks and thought about love. I was at home wanting to sleep. A child threw up on me, and I'm having to deal with it as calmly and kindly as possible and choose love in that moment. And we don't look at that and call it ego work. We don't look at that and call it spiritual, because she's not on a mat in India thinking about work, thinking about love, right? And so this is what we need from the feminine side of things, is this embodied experience side of spirituality, that you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. It's the experience of just being alive in your body and really paying attention to the quality of your experience, and a whole different kind of way of being opens up. And so that's why I sometimes get a little bit feisty on social media, is because as a woman in religion and in the spiritual space, I still feel like with men, I always have to prove kind of my worth. People will ask me constantly, have you had a Kundalini awakening? Have you done this drug combination? Have you read this? Have you done this? And really, what we're missing is that I understand that you went to Costa Rica and did this amazing thing. You don't understand that I stayed up with a child all night with diarrhea and throwing up, and I'm cleaning shit on the floor. Don't tell me that that's not ego work. Don't tell me that I didn't choose love over ego in that moment. You're missing something that's really essential to this conversation. And so it's something that has become very personal to me, being in this space a long time, is that when men define religion and when men have defined spirituality, we're missing that it's not just about transcending, it's not about truth claims, it's not about doing, it's about life at the level of experience. And often it's female voices that really do that the best, because female spirituality has always been embodied and relational.
Oh my God. What a beautiful ride. Everyone should listen to that segment again. Everyone, men and women both. And here's my reflection on what you just said, because I feel it again. I feel it in the body. And my wife is my teacher, has always been. And I only realized it recently. That's how men are, right? Like, my wife has been my teacher the entire journey, and I'm only now really appreciating it and opening to it fully in the way that it has deserved. She is exactly like that. I don't really meditate. I've never meditated. yeah, she struggles with existential terror, like will wake up in the middle of the night screaming because she's seeing the void. And the attachment to children, the attachment to spouse, the relational aspect of it, balancing career and work, and then having a dipshit husband who for the last 10 years has been growing his spiritual ego to come home and be like, yeah, man, that retreat was amazing, man. There's emptiness, like there's no self, like all of this is just vibrating. Well, what about your kids? Man, they're just patterns of energy, man. Like that's really, of course you don't really feel that. You're parroting this sort of intellectualization of an experience that's beyond description. And she's just looking at me patiently like, I'll wait for you to come home. I'll wait for you to really feel it. And when it really clicked for her, she just had this spontaneous awakening that came from letting me have it one night, just telling me all this emotion that she'd been sitting on and repressing as I'm off like meditating and have all my little spiritual friends and I'm doing my show and all of this bullshit and getting all Zubin's so awake. And she's like, let me fucking tell you what the deal is. And it cracked both of us open. And the way she talks about it again is like, it's just this, it's just taking a walk, stepping in the mud, cleaning a diaper, just driving to work. That's all it is. You notice it's just this perfect flow. And yeah, she struggled with the nihilism component of that arose when she saw that everything was empty, that aspect of reality. But because of just how embodied she is, she would just feel into the body and go, yeah, it's empty, but fuck, what is this?
Yeah, why is my body doing this? Why do I have this core value over that core value? Why? I mean, it just becomes magic again when you dip into that. And so when we talk about, I'm so glad that you brought this up, when we talk about kind of the feminine side of spirituality, this isn't part of gender wars. This isn't like, there are times to be angry and we can, you can talk, fuck the patriarchy and do all of that. But this really is about inviting, because when I talk to men and I have male clients and my husband, there's this male loneliness epidemic. There's this idea that men are like, I'm only valued for what I can produce in the rat race. I'm miserable. Why can't we live in such a way where I have value just in who I am? And that is what feminine spirituality does. And so a lot of times people think that when you talk about the feminine side, we're saying that women should rule the world and be in these hierarchies with women at the top, which is just going to be, we're just going to flip it and it's just going to be the same problems.
Unopposed feminine aspect.
Yeah.
Whereas both men and women have both, actually.
Yeah. And this idea that what I want is just to enslave men and women are going to run the world. And I may get in a mood once in a while, but that's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about here is when you add this feminine voice, it not only improved the quality of my life, but it also helped my husband. So my husband could tap into his own body and say, well, what is my spiritual practice? And for him, it's triathlon training. And his pilgrimage is going on triathlons. And when he was in religion, he always felt like he wasn't good enough because he didn't read, he's not a reader. And so he doesn't do scripture reading, he doesn't do meditation, he doesn't do any of those things. So he always thought, I'm not spiritual. But as I'm sharing this with him, as I'm learning, he's uncovering, you know what? I feel that on long runs. That's where I meet my shadow self. That's where I do breathing exercises. That's where I get in touch with my body. That's where I feel these things, is when I do kind of my long runs and long bike rides. And so now we're in a situation where before, when we were married, we were both kind of in this religious box that we had to fit in. And now I'm more likely to say, this is how I experience being alive. This is what I really love to do. I really love conversation. I really love reading and writing. I really love girls' nights. I really love, whatever's buzzing in my body, and I just get to experience it. And he really loves his triathlons. And so like this, this past weekend, we were in Texas for his full Ironman, and it's his pilgrimage. It's his people. There's something so sacred about being on the finish line and seeing people's pure emotion, just every emotion on the spectrum, and their families hugging them. And we're all coming together to celebrate what these people were doing. It's a temple. It was sacred. It was spiritual. And now he gets to claim that, which is something that, in religion and spirituality, you feel like, well, it's not meditating, and it's not sitting in the sauna and doing the ice bath, and it's not, I don't have a perfect lotus pose when I sit on a mat, so I'm not spiritual. No, that is what makes him feel alive. And that experience of watching people at the finish line is absolutely sacred. And so it's not about gender wars. It's not about divisive. It's about when you add this voice to the spiritual conversation about embodied spirituality, it helps everyone. It invites everyone. The female gods, when we were matriarchal societies, they were not soul jealous gods like we get from the Old Testament God. They were much more communal. They were much more giving and nurturing. And so it's this inviting message more than this divisive message. But I do get that response a lot from men saying, oh, I was following your content for a while, but then you got into the gender wars and you hate men. And it's like, I'm meeting with men every day that are suicidal. I'm trying to help. But there's some female things that, because it's been missing in the conversation, when we fill that in the holes, it really helps everybody.
Yeah, that's how I see it with you, because it's interesting. You can read through your thing and you see it's almost like a spiritual feminism in a way. And for many guys who have been like through this thing, they get very triggered and very defensive and, oh, I don't want to mansplain and I don't want to do, she's going to, and the truth is what you're pointing at is what has been ignored for quite a long time. I mean, we're talking about maybe a couple millennia in the culture, which is the feminine aspect that we all have. So yes, it's embodied maybe more in the genetic feminine, X phenotype, genotype, and even that's saying a lot. But really, we all have both those aspects. And so with my wife and I, it's funny, we each will express to each other an aspect of the facet of reality in different ways. And she often expresses from the very embodied feminine, and I'll often express from the a little more masculine aspects. So she'll ask me a question about meaninglessness, and I'll say, the meaning is found in the absolute indescribability of this empty radiance. And she'll say, the meaning is found in Nina's face, our daughter. And we're both saying the same thing in a way, but coming from that different energetic. And so it's fun to then find the opposite aspect in you. It's not an opposite really, it's just a different energy, right? So when I feel the feminine arising, I feel the body, I feel it buzz when I'm talking to you. Like the conversation now and the conversation we had before off camera, I could feel the body light up, and it is a very embodied kind of knowing. It's a kind of an intelligence that we don't really honor and respect in Western culture, but it's so true because you know it right away, right, Britt? Like, it's like, no, we have to talk. Like, this just has to happen. It's a relational thing. Like, we just have to. Like, I don't know how this happened, but it's perfect. We have to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's interesting because sometimes people will talk about, well, Jesus had that, and the problem sometimes that I have with bringing Jesus into this conversation is other men who kind of talk about some of the feminine side of spirituality is that we're still only valuing it when it comes from a man. And so for me, even though I can talk about this now, this wasn't the space where I originally hung out. This has been a more recent journey for me, because I was kind of raised in a patriarchy. And I was raised in Mormonism, where women really do have a lot of kind of second-class citizen things in that particular religion. But then on top of that, I have this kind of on the bipolar spectrum mother who is like very emotional to the point that, you get a mommy issue a little bit with emotion, with the feminine in general, because your mother is kind of your first embodiment of the feminine, right?
I'm with you there. Yeah, my mom is very expressive emotionally.
And to me, it was almost too much, and it kind of showed an irrationality to emotion where I just thought that this is just irrational. And so the majority of my life hasn't been in embodied spirituality, even though I can talk about it now as a woman. It really has been in philosophy. So I went straight into philosophy. I was a history teacher. I mean, and I somewhat consciously, but mostly subconsciously, really valued the voice of men because the men are rational. The men, even when you talk about nihilism, the only people in history who have had the privilege to sit in their bathtubs and talk about nihilism and absurdism and put all these isms to all these things have been, white men who have wives and mistresses and maids watching their underwear. And those have been the only voices that we've had in the space philosophically. And so I really latched on to the male side and the benefits of being rational and the benefits of being logical and the benefits of philosophy, and didn't realize that there was this whole other world. There were other ways of being. There were other skills. There were other approaches that I was really cut off to because of being, some of that just internalized, being raised in a patriarchy, and then some of that with my mommy issues and her being so emotional that it kind of made me recede from emotion in general as a reaction. And so it's really an invitation to everyone, because it was an invitation to me that, hey, there's something here at the experience of being that's worth paying attention to, and even worth being alive for, in ways that the rational mind doesn't always understand, right? Or at least like doesn't always tap into. We can talk about the chemicals of love. We can talk about all of that. We can talk about how the reality is that everything that we do will be forgotten in 3 generations and life is meaningless. And we can talk on those scales, and we can do all of the logic around that. And all of that can still be, true from that approach. That can be true. And there's something about experience that is really, really cool and worth being alive for. And when you dig into that and really start to play in that space, and if you face the void, the everything bagel, if you face some of these things, then you get a little bit of bravery saying, if this is just a game and everything is meaningless and it's an illusion, how can I play this video game in a way that I do just for the enjoyment of the game? And that's really the core of what is happening a lot of times with depression. Depression is not always just you need more sunshine in your life. A lot of times depression is, this is a video game that I just don't want to play anymore. I just don't want to be this character anymore. And anyone who plays video games knows that you don't play the video game because there's some ultimate meaning when you get to the end. The point of playing the video game is for the experience of being in the game. And so how can you adjust your game and take really radical risks into that, because you know that you're going to die, and you know that, all of this is an illusion and whatever, to making your video game the game that you want to play. And when I started intentionally doing that, and it was hard, and you take big risks, and some friends didn't make it, and I made new ones and whatever, that's when life just drastically changed into one that was worth experiencing and being alive for, even in the face of harsh truths of reality.
Beautifully expressed. I love the everything bagel piece, because we're talking about everything everywhere all at once. And that whole heroine's journey of exactly that. That's actually something worth jumping back into, because you mentioned earlier this idea that shows up in spiritual circles of dying before you die. This knowing that, because we keep saying, yeah, we know we're going to die, but here's an interesting exploration is, well, okay, so what's that? What is death? What is here when I do allow everything to die, like your death meditation, where you're going through, and Ramana Maharshi, famous Indian sage, did exactly this. He laid back, and I think he had lost an uncle, and he had this traumatic reaction to it. And so he sat back and he goes, where did he go? Where did uncle go? Let me sit, lay flat, and imagine what happens when the body dies, when this dies. Where do I go? Where is the sense of awake presence? Where does that go? And then regressing all the way back into an indescribable, we can use the word void, you can use the word empty, it doesn't matter. But that dying before you die is how do I even say this? I almost don't want to talk about it too much, but it is a kind of unknowing knowing, for lack of a better word. It's not conceptual, that then makes all of this suddenly radiate in a way that is exactly what you're pointing at, like the perfection of just being alive. The video game suddenly is like, oh my God, how did they make this happen from nothing but electrons and pixels? And there's just a sense of radiant awe, like, oh my gosh. And so all thoughts of death, all thoughts of the future and the past fall away. And it's just like this sense of just radiant awe. And that is, again, another thing that's another aspect of reality that can show up when we directly face our deepest fears. And the last thing I'll say about this is grief. Recently having this be the dominant underlying emotion. There's a poem by David Whyte, The Well of Grief, which I'm fond to recite. And it basically says, those who will not slip beneath the still surface on the well of grief, turning down through its black waters to the place we cannot breathe, will never know the secret source from which we drink the secret water, cold and clear, nor find in the darkness glimmering the small round coins thrown by those who wished for something else.
That's beautiful.
And it points right at, when you feel grief in its purest form, you feel like you're going to die. It is everything. And what's on the other side of that? You can't say a word about it. But when you come through that other side by allowing the grief, instead of using the religious rituals and the different things to avoid it, or the spiritual bypass, or the Buddhism emptiness to say, oh, it's not a real thing. When you really allow it, when you embody it with the full feminine aspect, with the masculine aspect, all of it together, you can't talk about it. But what comes out is you and me having this conversation in this perfection of this moment, and knowingly.
Yeah. And language is always hard in this space, and it becomes especially hard in secular spirituality because all of these words have religious kind of connotations or spiritual baggage. And so the language is very difficult. But what's really exciting about this conversation is that this may be the first time in human history where we can even have this conversation, where we can actually have some science of spirituality to say there's something interesting here. We know a little bit about the brain. We can kind of sense what's going on, but we don't have to kind of believe the unbelievable in order to jump into that space. And we actually, for the first time, can really start to separate kind of the dogma and all the truth claims wrapped around all these things, and actually get to the experience itself. And that makes this conversation really interesting to have right now, because 500 years ago, it would be better for you when you just talk about human well-being, whatever the religion was of your tribe, it would be better for you to be a part of that religion, because there's just no way that you can really survive without that religious community. And so this may be the first time where we can actually talk about these experiences of being, these experiences in meditation or on psychedelics or meaning of life, and not have to go into these spaces where we're making claims about reality that we just don't know yet. And that's where people like your Deepak Chopra types get in trouble, because they'll talk about these things, they'll talk about the experience, but then it starts to get wrapped around truth claims. And then he'll go to colleges and he'll do some of that language with actual, quantum physicists, and he'll just get roasted. He'll just get devastated. He'll just get massacred because he'll start to kind of add scientific language to his experience. And the really beautiful thing is that we can value this experience and still admit to ourselves that we really don't know a lot about what is going on with ultimate reality. And we could even make a claim, I go back on forth on this one, but we could even make a claim that we're not interacting with ultimate reality at all. Like, we can make a claim that we are really just seeing an interface here. Like, we're really just seeing icons on an evolutionary fitness computer.
Donald Hoffman, exactly.
Donald Hoffman, right? We can make that claim. And I don't have to turn off my brain. I can listen to all of that. It's fascinating. And still, okay, this is a video game. I can't see outside the video game. Fine. I'm still going to play this video game, and I'm going to design it the way that I want to experience it. And I want to play it just for the fact that there's an experiential aspect to this. And that to me has been it's been more whole, because I don't have to turn off any part of me. I don't have to do the blinders and say, oh, this truth is challenging something about my identity. The fun thing about this conversation that we're having right now is that when you have that death before you die and you've let go of that identity, now we can play in the truth game, and it's just for fun. It's just, what the hell is going on here? Let's talk about it. And it's so enjoyable. And I don't have to defend anything. If I'm wrong, it's delightful because now I get to learn something new. It's delightful that I've been proven wrong. And it's just a totally different game. But when I left religion, it wasn't like that. I was still seeking for truth, because if I could find truth, I could know how to pattern my life. I could do the right things. I could have some kind of anchor. And when I didn't find any, that's when I dipped into my nihilism. But when I shifted into this experience side of things and really immersed myself into the spiritual side of things, even with my skepticism, it really opened a different way of life, where I can play in the truth. I can play in these Donald Hoffman, Robert Sapolsky kind of spaces. None of that is challenging to me. I don't have any identity or ego attached to anything being true. I don't even know if we're interacting with truth. And yet it's still really great to be alive. And that's been a beautiful place to hang out as someone who was a truth seeker, and that identity had to die at some point in the process, because now truth seeking is just how I play. How we're having this conversation is how I play. Like, I'm playing. And that is just a totally different way of playing the truth game than wrapping my identity around this has to be true.
Dude. Okay. Dude. So check it out.
Such a fun
man.
game.
Oh God. Man. So the identity as truth seeker is a fascinating stage in this whole unfolding. And it really is. And I remember because going through the sort of pure atheism and the skeptic science piece, then realizing, but there's nothing here. Something else is here, and I know it intuitively and experientially, but I don't even have the words for that. Then discovering somebody like a Donald Hoffman, this is how it went down for me. I discovered Donald Hoffman, saw his TED Talk, and was just like, that's it. That's the truth. That's it. Everything's consciousness. We're not seeing things accurately. We're seeing icons that are evolutionary fitness payoff indicators. It's like Grand Theft Auto. We're playing a video game, and the source code is consciousness. There's no matter. Everything's consciousness. That's it. I figured it out. That is a fixation, because it turns out we don't know shit about anything, and we actually may not be able to in the way that we think. In a relative sense, we can. We can build amazing devices. We can use quantum mechanics. It's very precise. All great. In this realm of icons, that's wonderful. Base reality, we have no idea. We can't know. And reality itself doesn't fixate. It's sensed intuitively, almost as a magician. That is pure potentiality, and everything kind of springs from it. So at some point, it's exactly like you said, it arises as play. It's like, oh, how cool if everything were consciousness, it'd be like this. And we can have this argument and this debate, but nothing's held. It's kind of like, how about this? And how about this? Oh, that's ridiculous. What if everything was
what if everything's alive? What if the sun is experiencing consciousness and there's some form of panpsychism? That's possible. Let's talk about it. And then it becomes just so fun to play in these spaces. Whereas before, when I was seeking for truth as something to cling to because I needed an anchor, that was a different game than the game that I'm playing now.
It's a game that feels more desperate, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And then you're willing
more clinging.
That's right. You're willing to fight. I remember I did a podcast with Peter Attia a few years back, and I was like, hey, let me run this theory by you. And I went through the whole Hoffman cascade, and he was just like, yeah, but I mean, it could just be all material and you're just seeing it this way. I'm like, yeah, you can't really prove it one way or the other, but let me tell you why it's this way. And you could see me desperate to convince this smart guy that I'm right so I can get the validation from it. And I watch it back now and I'm just laughing. I'm like, look at that character doing this dance, trying to make sure that he feels like he's okay. And now it's like, you could tell me the world was made of cheese and everything's a Burger King Whopper and I can have it my way or not. And I'd be like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, that's kind of neat and unsurprising.
Yeah, unsurprising. That's interesting. Religious people always say to me on TikTok, they'll say, just wait till you stand in front of God and you're going to be so sorry. And I'm like, I'm going to be fascinated. If I stand at the pearly gates and I have to, I will be just endlessly curious. This is so great. And won't you be, afraid of all that you left certain religions, and like, absolutely not. Because if there is a God that's worth worshiping, it's a God that would know what I would need to believe. It's a God who would have given me this heart and mind, both of which took me out of the church. And if faith is a moral virtue above love and compassion, which are still aspects that I try to live by in my life, then it's a God not worth worshiping, and I'll happily go to hell. And so I don't have this, even with the afterlife, I'm just excited to be surprised, even though my sense is that we're going to be worm food. If I'm not worm food, I don't feel like I'd have any regret at all. I just feel like it would just be so, like you said with the hamburger thing, like, wow, who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
And
yeah,
who would have thought? But I do have to say, to get there, like, was hard. Like, when you lose psychological and sociological anchors, our nervous systems aren't made for that. And we really may be, I tell this to people sometimes who are recovering from religion or who have religious trauma, is that they may be the first person in thousands, tens of thousands of years who have had to face death and meaninglessness without a story, without a community, right? Without ritual, without all of these things that we have developed as superstitious primates that we are to be able to handle these things. And so when I say it's hard, it's not like, oh, my marathon was hard. I mean, like, so hard that our brains evolved to develop stories and be superstitious and develop religions so that we didn't have to face it. Like, it was psychologically unhinging. I remember one time I don't know if you've ever done the headless meditation.
Yeah.
I did one of those one time, but it was at a time when I was kind of psychologically a little bit unhinged anyway. And it totally I might have checked into a mental institution. Like, I was really unhinged at the time. Like, when I saw my hand, I would just say, there's a hand. But in a way that, like, probably wasn't healthy. Like, I was starting to detach from physical, to have some depersonalization and some even depression with that. Anyway, and losing religion, losing God, losing truth, losing self, losing free will, losing community, losing family, losing your path for life, losing morality. I mean, I really lost everything when I lost God and when I had that kind of faith crisis. And those things are hard. There's a reason that we've developed tools to face those things. But the benefit is, when we do kind of sit in that and grow to meet it, we get this lovely quote by Nietzsche that says that you grow to the point that you thank you look in the void and you thank the monsters for not swallowing you whole, and you throw a rose. Something like you throw a rose into the void to thank the monsters who didn't succeed in swallowing you whole. I think that's the quote. And it's this concept of, yes, there's monsters there. There's monsters in nihilism. There's no monsters in the void. There's monsters in the chaos. But if you can sit with it and develop tools and find tools and conversations and people to help in that place, you actually grow to the point that you throw a rose to the monsters and thank them for what they did to force you into an intentional, embodied, beautiful life that you are awake for in a way that most people never get to be. And that is a great blessing that is on the other side of losing all of your psychological anchors, which is hard and scary. And we do lose people. Like, we lose people to suicide in that place. Fundamentalism is more violent on others, but nihilism is more violent on the self. And that's why I enjoy talking about these tools, because I know from people that these, like, not me, just me kind of, but, me sharing some of these tools that have helped me, I know that it saved people's lives, because it is a hard place to be, but there's benefits to going through it.
That's the best endorsement of this thing that I've heard, because I've heard it described as, and I agree with this to some degree, the process that you go through of this letting go, of this dying, is unwantable. It's unwantable by the mind, and so unwantable, like you said, that we've developed millennia of structures to avoid doing it. In fact, it is the greatest taboo in human consciousness to question reality itself, to question the dogma that I am this and I am that, and that there's a reason, because the psychological unmooring. You talked about The Headless Way, Richard Lang, and I forget the original guy, but this idea that like you can have a glimpse of non-duality, selflessness that can stabilize in a way that it can be, because the mind it's not gone anywhere. It's now trying to make sense of the fact that it's realized it never really was in the way it thought it was. And that is not okay.
That's hard. Yeah, that's hard.
It's really hard. It's really hard. And so what we don't really have are great tools to support people going through this, because in spiritual, and there's been articles written about this recently. There was an NPR piece about this, which I thought wasn't great, well done, wasn't balanced, but was still accurate to the degree. People go on these Goenka meditation retreats where they're silent for 10 days. They don't get a lot of support. And then they experience these things where the self drops away and everything is just, and they become profoundly, some of them, probably people with a tendency to it. Maybe they had childhood trauma. Maybe they had other things that they haven't, that hasn't shown up. Now the unconscious is unleashed. It's like you took the cork out of a lifetime of repressed conditioning. Now it's gone, and suddenly you're feeling everything, and you have no context or container, and it's like dying and being tortured at once, and
like being put in a blender. It's almost like you're waking. It's like you're dreaming, because all of your subconscious fears and subconscious desires, and it's all just, instead of being nicely compartmentalized by all these systems that we've done, it's all just kind of this blender. And in some ways, it is a kind of psychosis. In some definitions. And one of the hard things about this conversation, and you mentioned it when you brought up trauma, is that if chaos has that element of trauma to it, it's going to be extra difficult. And one of the problems that we're seeing with Gen Z, and one of the challenges for that generation, is that my generation, your generation, we had a little bit of a nest period where we could have this kind of small container of a world, and this religion and this ritual. You had a coming of age ritual. I had coming of age rituals. And it's kind of this little nest to develop kind of, if we're talking about Maslow's hierarchy, some security, some belonging, some identity. So here's the really tough part of this conversation, is that for you and me, we can go through some of these ego deaths. We can go through some of these really meeting chaos in the void because we had a nest period, and we can get through that. One of the things that we're learning is that for younger people, especially, this is why I don't recommend psychedelics for young people in general, is because if you didn't have a period where you developed identity, belonging, and security, then facing these things is going to be a lot harder. It's really hard to have an ego death when you never had an ego. You actually have to build an ego first. It's the most
healthy one. Yeah.
And a healthy one. And it's actually the most spiritual thing that you can do. And so sometimes I meet with women who they've tried for 5 years to do all this ego dissolving work with all the gurus. And because of their narcissistic mother, or because of their religion, or whatever reason, they never developed a healthy ego. So they're trying to kill something that never actually got off the ground. And so it's one of the problems with Gen Z, is not only are they facing nihilism and the kind of the deconstruction of institutions and all of the chaos that opens up, and we have no idea what their life paths are going to be, and all of that chaos. Not only are they having to face that, they're having to face that without the nest period that every other generation in history got, because they got these phones. Now they're comparing themselves to the whole world. We're not growing up in these family communities. We're not growing up in religious communities. So now they're facing nihilism without even a nest. And it's like throwing a baby bird into a hurricane and saying fly. And it's like, absolutely not. And so that's one of the hard things about this conversation, is that sometimes you have to adjust your tools based on kind of where you are. If you're a 50-year-old man who's been a CEO, it may be helpful to do some ego dissolving and do some psychedelics and do some retreats. If you are 18 and you don't even know if you haven't even developed yourself as a person, it actually is a spiritual journey to figure out who you are. What do you like? What do you not like? What's your personality type? Maybe do some Enneagram work and actually develop your voice, because you actually can't skip that part. And that's been an extra hard problem for Gen Z, is that they're facing nihilism at a younger age without a nest period. And now we're not seeing For Gen Z, we're not seeing that these are kids who are really being negatively affected by fundamentalist religion. That's usually not going to be the thorn in their side. We're losing them because it's too much chaos. There's not enough to be alive for. And the gap of tools, like, you can give them Albert Camus and expect a 16-year-old to read some deep philosophy. And there's just a gap there. There's a gap there between the tools that are available and where these kids are. And we are losing these kids. And it's really, really sad to see.
That is absolutely a crucial piece of expression, actually, because we talk about Gen Z about, oh, there's too much social media and there's not enough this and there's too much helicoptering and there's all the coddling of the American mind, John Haidt stuff. Great, wonderful, beautiful, great. However, we don't talk about this order chaos thing, which the older folks like myself, the 50-year-old former CEO with the ego dissolution and the retreats and the psychedelics, that's me. Perfect. I needed that. Without that, my ego was the dominant form. Now, this is how it would show up, and I'll compare it to my Gen Z kids. I have a Gen Alpha child who's 12, barely Gen Alpha, and then a Gen Z child who's 16. So when I started having these insights and doing these things, the egoic part of me tried to own it, and it would say, okay, now I know something and I can teach my kids about the nature of reality, and it'll help their suffering and all the justifications. But really, it was a kind of control thing. So I tell my 10-year-old, hey, have you ever felt like this is almost like an illusion, like a simulation, where it's just an appearance, but like if you really look inside and you try to find where you are, you can keep looking and you won't find anything. Keep looking, keep looking. Where are you? Is this really? So I'm pointing directly at the empty nature of reality. Holy shit, Britt. Like, she looks at me like, and I thought, okay, cool. Maybe she gets it. Maybe she doesn't. She's a kid. She's closer to this. My wife tells me a couple weeks later that, man, Maya has been absolutely terrified. She feels like everything's unreal. She's saying that everything is just like, it's not substantial. And I'm like, oh my God, she does see it, but she has no container, no ego structure, hasn't built a self, and now it's being disrupted. And so we had to sit down with her and go, actually, okay, so listen, like maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But the thing is, man, this is actually as real as it needs to be. So we need to do our things. We go through, we grow. I look at Daddy, he went to medical school, he did all these things. And she started to recover her sense of identity and all of that. But my wife did not let me off the hook. She's like, listen, Ace, like, you want to come pulling your bullshit masculine spirituality shit with a 10-year-old, like you do not do that. Like, because I know I've touched into existential terror. A 10-year-old has no container for that. And so that was lesson one. Then lesson two was I see my 16-year-old, we go on a hike and I tell her, she's like, what do you and Mom do when you're talking about the spirituality stuff and awakening and all that? And so I just went very systematically through the whole arc of it. And she is silent the whole time as we're hiking, which is unusual for her. And she's listened to the whole thing. And I can tell she understands intellectually. And she just goes, great. What's that got to do with me? I got homework to do. I got to make a living. I have to go to school. Like, I have to get into college. Like, how does that apply here? And I said, do all those things, but know that underlying it, everything is okay. And then at some point it will come back. But so that's beautiful. Keep exactly that understanding. You know what Mom and I are doing, but it doesn't have to apply right now to you. You go through and you grow yourself, your sense of self, your identity. You become strong. Then you can see it dissolve. Yeah.
It's a big temptation for all parents, I think, too. Like, we're flying into these really cool spaces of these ideas and these experiences, and we want to share them with our kids so that they can maybe avoid some of the pitfalls that we fell into. But all the science says is that doing inner child work with even teens, even late teens, is psychologically damaging because it starts to make them feel like they're schizophrenic. Doing shadow work with kids and teens, also not appropriate. And so it's a hard thing when you're in a chaos space where you're kind of flying around in chaos and feel okay, and you've made peace with the chaos, you've made peace with the unknown, to then go back for children and say, actually, for this 7-year-old, the most appropriate thing they need to know is that they're good guys and bad guys. And that's sometimes hard because I'm on this nuanced space where like, I don't even know if we have free will. What does good guys and bad
what
guys
is good
mean?
and bad, right? Yeah.
Even in that context, and I'm playing in all these spaces, but actually developmentally, the best thing for that 7-year-old is this is a good guy and he's always been a good guy, and this is a bad guy and he's always been a bad guy. And it's not lying. It's not lying because the purpose of the nest is there's going to be a hurricane out here that you're going to meet eventually. And we want to developmentally help them to be able to build their wings to fly in that. And that means going back to things that we have outgrown as parents.
Yeah.
Like I can fly in chaos and not have free will and talk about all that and be fine. I'm totally fine accepting that I don't have free will. But to really convince that to a 12-year-old, actually, for their motivation for where they are in life, they need to feel like they're accountable for their choices. That's actually really healthy for them to feel like I need to be accountable for my choices. And so, you know, I do this carefully because I really try not to lie. It's really one of my core values is honesty as much as possible. But we can do this developmentally appropriate so that kids can grow in this kind of nest period to be able to face hard things. And that's essentially our choice with children. We either shelter them and say, stay in this little bubble that I've created for you and everything else is Satan, or however you're creating your bubble, or you build them up to be strong. And we do that over time, and we do that in developmentally appropriate ways. And so tools for 50-year-old men who maybe have an overdeveloped sense of ego are not the same tools for an 18-year-old who's feeling a little bit lost and starts to dabble into spirituality, and now they're doing headless meditations and doing psilocybin. And if I look back and if I would have done some of those things really early on, I really think I would have struggled. I really, really think that I would have struggled.
I couldn't agree more. For me, that exploration came, you know, in college when the first time I'd ever done any kind of drug, and I smoked weed out of a bong, and it was like a kind of psychosis in a way. Like I realized, wow, the mind, what is this? And then LSD after that, and I almost felt like there was a kind of yes, it's true. I realized the nature of certain things that the mind had kept under wraps, like, wow, everything's just happening. And actually it was only like a few years back when I had started having non-dual experiences of reality just being as it is, everything just as it is, that I realized, oh, that's what it was like on LSD back when I was 19. I just never at the time, it felt like psychosis. Now it feels like truth. And it feels like the peace that passes all understanding. Like it's just this perfection. But back then it felt like I'm not here. I'm not in control. And to where I just swore it off for decades. I was like, I'm not going near that. That is destabilizing. So yeah, of course, right? Of course. Like there are these developmental stages. And for me, I'm still grateful that I had that experience because it opened my mind in a way that I would have actually compressed my worldview even more tightly had I not kind of distorted it open in that way. But that doesn't mean that it's right for my kids. I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. Like just be as best a person as you can, good and bad, right and wrong, get your finances under control, all the shit that parents are supposed to teach. And then at the same time, you don't lie to them. Like you said, you go, no, actually underlying it all is this radiant unknowingness.
Yeah, you're trying to hold both. It's like, yes, I want you to do your homework, even though in some part of my brain, I know it's not even like just base level meaningless. It's like next level meaningless.
Next level meaningless.
That you have to write scribbles on a page in order to whatever. But actually developing reading and writing at your age is going to be able to help you. It's going to open you up to tools that are going to help you later in life when you're facing hard things. Your ability to just read and recite that poem that you hold into your heart is because you have had some education and some meaningless scribbles on a page and reading scribbles on a page to be able to develop your mind, to be able to have that and to hold that with you. And so it's this weird thing as a parent where you want them to be developing skills for later in life, but you try to hold it loosely. Like, it's not that you need to get a straight A's or else you're reflecting bad on my ego as a parent. Like we don't have to do that. But it's holding on to these important things, knowing that it's preparing you for some challenges in the future as an adult.
Yeah. There's a whole conversation we could have hopefully in person sometime, where we talk about parenting in this way, because it's been a journey. It is. And I know you have like 4 children, and
I have 4,
yeah. 2 are adopted, and
I have 3 adopted, and 1 biological, and they're young. So like 5, 6, 7, 12. And it is a challenge, but it also is really beautiful. When you were talking about, the meaning of life kind of things, the thing that stopped my brain when I was in that logical place of like, you cannot justify life on earth. You cannot justify being alive. Logically, I was there, like I was fully on that logic train of there is no meaning to life. And it started to get quite dark of taking yourself out of life. But when I looked into the eyes of my son, there was something else happening, and I couldn't explain it yet. I couldn't contextualize it yet, where I knew that, him coming off the bus from school, yes, logically, I know that this is ultimately meaningless, but there was something else that's happening when I'm looking him in the eyes, right? Where there's something meaningful about this moment of him getting off the bus and looking for my face and having his face light up, right? To tell me about his day. And I could hold that. And so parenting is a challenge, but ultimately it's one that makes my life fundamentally more worth living too.
Yeah, beautifully said. I feel that directly. This was one other thing with the feminine aspect that my wife was telling me about, because I was trying to describe to her what awakening was like for me, like what, and even that's just all conceptual, like what is awakening? And it doesn't happen to anyone, because the awakening is realizing there wasn't a one here that it happens to some degree. But I was telling her about this, and she said, oh yeah, that's bullshit. She goes, I had that experience. When? Childbirth, first child, which was, very traumatic kind of birth, like because the epidural kind of failed at the last minute, and it's like, oh shit, the kind of just incredible amount of instant pain, but then the meaning, and then the child on the chest, and all of it together at once. And I remember she was different after that birth, and it wasn't like a postpartum depression type of different. It was like a whoa, like what even is this? Like I didn't recognize her. And she told me later, she's like, yeah, no, something shifted. Like I don't know what it was, but everything just kind of made sense in a way, like beyond conceptual sense. And so and it doesn't mean you have to have, so we're not trying to say, oh, well, people who don't have kids won't have this meaning sense. And it is this kind of a sense. It's an energetic thing. You can have it with anything. You can have it with a tree. You can have it. I mean, it's relational. It's relational. Just for us as parents, it's like, it shows up in this way. It shows up as the child looking at you and looking for you, and, you feeling bad that you said the wrong thing. But I will say one thing, Britt, like your kids are very lucky to have you. There's an energetic kind of aspect to this journey, right? Where there's an openness and a kind of a relaxed sense that kids pick up with. They're very empathic. So when they feel that the parent isn't taking it egoically, that they're not getting all A's or whatever, they can feel it and they relax a little too. So it's just a nice energetic environment. So sometimes we can let ourselves off the hook for the things so much we say and try to do. And it's much more like, how are we being with our kids? That's. I
hope so. I do try to lean into that. My imposter syndrome or my shadow self is reminding me, but of like, yeah, but sometimes you get on podcasts and talk about spirituality, and then the second you get off the podcast, you scream at your kids because they had markers on the floor and they just destroyed the carpet. And then there's some obvious hypocrisy in that moment that's humorous when you really face yourself. But yeah, I hope so. I tell people that my most consistent meditation is the 1 minute that I get before my kids get off the bus to take a breath and to really center and to really get into that space, so that when they get off the bus, I'm present for the emotional, offloading that they do in that moment. Because if I don't do that, I'm on my phone and I'm still in work mind, and then they start chattering and screaming, and I'm not aware of my triggers with the noise, and then I'm snapping. And so even as someone who is in the field of spirituality, this is my full-time job, is being an atheist spiritual director. It's not that I do 2-hour meditations every night and, astral project myself into other dimensions. It's the 30 seconds I take to recenter myself when the kids get off the bus. And it took me so many years of kind of unpacking internalized patriarchy to realize that that was what it was really all about anyway.
Beautifully said. And this gets to the point of this kind of spiritual perfectionism that is one of the hazards of this space. People will look at a Brit and they'll say, oh, she's really got it together. She's a spiritual director. She's so clear. She's so realized. And they don't see the fact that we're like humans. We have to struggle with these things that humans struggle with. And that is part of the journey. That is part of life. That is part of the beauty of it, part of the meaning of it. And if we don't show authentically that aspect of it, I think we're doing people a disservice, because then they try to, they'll put you on a pedestal like any other religious spiritual figure. They will start to feel like they're not enough. And then it's a kind of a hierarchy as kind of spiritual hierarchy. So I see this in the space all the time, people acting like they've really got it figured out, and they don't let you know that, oh, they just went through this painful divorce and it was the worst thing they've ever experienced. And they're not talking about that, So for me, it's always like those things. Like I remember yelling at my daughter in a way that was so inappropriate in the car, saying, I'd rather be anywhere else right now than driving you two around. You know that, right? So stop complaining. It was that kind of deal. And then immediately feeling the energy in the body of how incredibly hurtful that was, and feeling her respond in that contracted way, like I'm broken, like something's wrong with me, right? Like meaning her. And immediately then going, okay, this is where this kind of presence, like realizing this in the moment and going, you know what? I'm really sorry. I didn't mean that at all. You got to understand where that came from. That's about me. It's not about you. Daddy is really stressed. He's feeling all these triggers with things where he feels like he's not in control of his life a little. And so I'm blaming it on everyone else, but really it's just a thought that I'm not in control. So I can sit with that discomfort without yelling, I'm sorry. And you could see you could feel her relax, But even then, how many times have we not done that? How many times have we missed it? So then we beat ourselves up, but that's not productive. Humans are complex.
Yeah. And the spiritual space is one of the best places to build an ego, because it's like, you post on Instagram that you had an ego death, and it's like, then who's the one posting about it on Instagram, right? And
why do you use the word I? There's no I, right?
Spirituality is just one of the best places, because you can give lip service to this and you can feel really special. And sometimes you can start being treated like a prophet, and you get these kind of Jay Shetty type characters who maybe without going into all of that, maybe there's a little bit of that temptation to not only really be about helping people and spiritual tools, but really getting high on the idea that you help people, getting high on being the guru, getting high on all of that. And it's something that I have to actively be aware of. And so there's this great meditation that I use where it's this meditation app called Mindfulness Plus that I really like, or it's a podcast actually. And he takes you through different kind of ego places, money and sex and fame and all these things. And you just kind of see how you show up. And I noticed, and for me, it was when he moved into the fame one, it wasn't fame. It was when people ask you for your opinion. Oh, Britt, what do you think about this? That I noticed, ooh, there's something in my body that really likes that. Okay, that's something that I have to be aware of. Okay, I'm going to be really open about my shadow self. I'm going to be really open about the times as a mother that I had intrusive thoughts and I wanted my kids to. There was a time where when my husband left the house with the kids, I would fantasize about them kind of going off the road, because I was so psychotic with postpartum and all of the things. And I just had to say to myself, ooh, there's something here where I like a little bit people asking my advice. And so I need to be aware of that. So I have my own spiritual directors. I talk about my shadow self. I talk about the time yesterday that I snapped at my kids in order to kind of intentionally combat that. Because if you're not intentionally combating the ways that ego is going to show up, it's going to show up in your spirituality too. It's going to show up in, this is how I feel special. I have these special powers from the universe. I manipulate energy. I was born with my third eye open. I've always been a psychic or a medium. There's all these like little temptations that even in the spiritual space, you get to feel really special. You get to feel like you're better than people, or you get to really have your ego get excited about the image that you're putting out into the world. And if you're not directly combating that, it's going to show up.
Absolutely. So important because in the spiritual space, actually, I think ego is more empowered because it does feel like it has a special power, and it can easily fall into patterns. Like you said, if there's a shadow part of you that really craves, let's say, some power, like I actually can do things in the world. Like I have the ability to make things move. If I don't like the way this is, I can make a call and that will change. And honestly, like it's interesting because those things arise here, like having grown this platform over years, there's a certain degree of power that I have in certain spaces. Like I can make phone calls to people, I can do things. And boy, that is an addictive and slippery kind of thing.
But when it's wrapped around spirituality, you don't see a red flag. You just see oh, I'm just growing my podcast to help people.
That's
and
right.
so it's so sneaky. It's sneakier here than it is, I think, in other fields.
That's right. That's right. So actually for me, part of the most painful part of this dying process over the last few months and years has been letting that kind of power and influence atrophy to some degree and compressing it down to just the people that are interested in this, which is like a kind of death for someone who all his life has tried to feel okay about himself by the validation of others. So when you don't get all the likes and all the views and all of that, it's like just a totally disvalidating thing when you had it once. So in a way, it's a great meditation, and it still comes up. Like sometimes I'll see somebody do something and they'll do it really in a way that I'm like, oh, I could probably do that better, but they're getting all this attention. And I'm just like, it feels like someone's stabbing me in the chest. Like it's a physical, energetic feeling. And I notice it and I'm like, oh, there's the ego. It really, it's okay. It's like trying to keep me safe. It wants me to be successful, but I don't need to be in that way. Like everything's okay. And you have to kind of really be present.
Yeah. But that was really good in your self-talk to yourself to not shame the ego, because you're right. The ego is just there to protect you. It's just doing its job. But we can tell it like, hey, I know you really want to do this better so that you look this way, but my relationships are good. Like I don't need this from you right now, but thank you. And for me, that shows up with the truth-seeking side is that I really loved being the person for a while that in whatever space that I was in, because I was studying so much, wherever I was on the religious or spiritual spectrum, I felt like I had answers, and I really loved being the person who had answers. Yeah. And so now, like when I see someone who's getting a lot of praise for knowing a lot of answers, and I have to sit there and say, I actually know nothing. I actually don't even think we're interacting with truth. Sometimes my ego's not very excited about that. But it allows us to play in spaces and really connect with people in a way that's beyond ego to ego, because whenever we're connecting ego to ego, we're playing this validation game with each other. And whenever we can drop kind of that ego defense and be able to just be human, just this is how I'm humaning, this is my human experience, we're creating this platform where other people can meet us there. And that's the good stuff on the other side of some of the hard things that I've been through, is that the relationships get so deep where you're just so naked in your human experience and really met in that space. And that's something that I've never experienced in religion, where you kind of have to put on a face and play a certain game in order to do that. But that's really the good stuff of life. But your ego is going to throw up a little bit of a fight for you to get there.
For sure. It's going to throw up the fight of its life, actually, in a way.
Yeah.
Depending on how far you go, because it feels existentially threatened. And I think, again, you pointed this out and I pointed this out, and I think we should say it again. Shaming the ego, going to war with the ego, the only thing that does that is the ego. So in the end, it's a self-defeating prospect. What makes sense is to realize what it is. It's not some entity. It's just a process, and it's been there for eons in some form in human consciousness. And even, by the way, even that's a story, right? Because we don't know anything. But the way we can talk about it conceptually is it's been there to keep us safe, to let us reproduce, to give us a sense of separation so that we can get things done in this play space that we're in. So honor it, thank it, accept it, invite it to say what it has to say, but try not to identify with it. Don't get lost if you can. And then that's enough.
Yeah, when someone asks me, like, what is it like in your head on this side of things? And when I'm in a good headspace, what it feels like is just a really expansive room where all of my inner child, all my previous versions of myself are there, and my emotions are there, and my shadow self is there, and my ego is there, and they all just have information. And this is this parable from Rumi about the guest house, and they come, and I offer each one tea. What information do you have for me? Oh, I'm feeling, I just got off the phone with my mom, and I'm feeling a little triggered, and okay, thank you for that information. And then you get to intentionally decide what you want to do with that information. But it's all just sensations and information, and each one is a part of you, and nothing is shamed. And it's for me, when I left religion, I went seeking all other religions and spiritual paths to try to find temple, to try to find home, to try to find my spiritual home. Not realizing, of course, that it was always there within. I just didn't have a room big enough for all of me. It was just all compartmentalized and shamed, and I didn't even know these aspects of myself existed. But to have that room where you're just kind of inviting to tea all these different responses that you have in your body all the time, it's this eye of the storm ability that we have as humans that even last year, one of my daughters, she fell out of a window. She had a traumatic brain injury. She was in the hospital for 6 weeks. And I experienced a lot of what you experienced with your dad, which is like, this is painful. But because I had done some of this work, I'm not having a lot of secondary suffering around, like, why did this have to happen? And is it my fault? And she shouldn't have to die. And I didn't have a lot of those thoughts. It was just really sitting with her in the reality that she was in the hospital, and just really sitting with that, in the grief of that, but also still valuing that even if this child was going to die, I'm so grateful to have had this child in my life. And I'm so, those kinds of feelings. I forgot where I was going with this. But what were we talking about before?
Oh,
I was thinking of my daughter, and then I just
I'm
left
still
it,
in the room with you and your daughter.
Oh, in the room, yeah.
Hospital.
And so even when things like that happen, even when really traumatic, hard things, I still have to, some people think, oh yeah, you're playing a video game of life. You don't pay bills, and you don't have hard things happen to you, and you don't suffer, and you don't have injuries. And it's like, no, I have all of those things. Like, I still have to decide how much I want to interact with the matrix. I still have surgeries on my body. I still have, my daughter almost died, and I was in the hospital for a long time. I still have these terrible things. But there's this sense of this room, this spacious room that is kind of the center of this storm that has given me just so much inner peace and stability, even when hard and suffering things are happening. And that has been the temple that I've been looking for my whole life.
Oh, that's beautiful. That still space, that central quiet, the eye of the storm, you called it. I've used that analogy where the world, the matrix, is spinning around, but at the center is this stillness. That is the space that I actually consciously entered when I heard that my dad was, having that experience in the hospital. And to have that space as the temple is so precious. It's our birthright. It is our temple. It's right there. And you don't have to look for it, really. It's just we have been ignoring it for so long that we don't see that it's right here. That's beautiful. And then sitting with the child, I mean, that would be and by the way, is she doing okay now? How are things?
Yeah. She was already kind of in special education before, and so already in various therapies before, so it wasn't a huge shock to continue to be in therapy after, but to the point now that most people wouldn't have, noticed that she had fallen and cracked her skull. So we're really, really lucky in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's like people may listen and they'll say, these two godless atheists can't even feel appropriately upset when their father dies or their child cracks their head. And I think I'd encourage them just to feel into what we're pointing at, because it's much more profound than that. It's much more immediate than that. It's feeling everything. creating the room so that everything is allowed. Like people say, oh, is awakening like you just don't feel all these things? Like you said, no. You feel everything times 20, but it doesn't stick to a story in the way that it used to.
You don't cling your identity to it that like, no, she can't die because children aren't supposed to die.
Right.
You know, like that's a delusion that we cling to that actually causes more suffering, when in reality, I could hold the grief, and I wept in the hospital for weeks and didn't know if she'd, wake up, because she was in a coma for some time, and all of that. Did I feel all of that as her mother? I felt every ounce of that as her mother. And I felt the magic of all of the nurses who took extra special care of her, and the ones, this makes me cry, the ones that braided her hair, right? And they didn't have to, right? They didn't have to, but they braided her hair, or they would call her pumpkin pie, and my daughter still remembers being called that, and went above and beyond to show love to this child. And I felt that too. And I felt gratitude for all of the science in the room that had saved her life. And I felt gratitude for the doctors. And I felt gratitude that even if she was going to die, I'm so glad that I got to meet her, because she's this feisty, this feisty girl, and one of my greatest spiritual teachers, because she is on like the 1 percentile of language, and I'm a language person. And so I had to learn how to connect with this child without language. It was a huge challenge and a spiritual teaching moment for me. And just so grateful that I got to meet her and all the beauty of who she was. And so when people say, yeah, this awakened person, you're just transcending the body. I didn't transcend my body at all. I felt all of it all at once, all the time. But there's a room spacious and big enough to hold it, to say that, yes, I'm crying because I don't know if my daughter's going to wake up. And that nurse just braided my daughter's hair. And that is so beautiful. And you can just hold both of it. And the experience, and that's really what we can grow to hold, is that we don't have to pretend that suffering doesn't happen because the body's an illusion. We don't have to play that game. And we also don't have to get so nihilistic that we miss the magic of what it is to be human, and the amazing things that humans do, and the beautiful things that humans do, and the art that humans create, and the ways that they connect, and the ways that they express. And paying attention to that. It's not like I turned off my rational mind. It's not that I turned off philosophy. It's not that I turned off, Donald Hoffman, or we don't have free will, or all these harsh truths. It's that spirituality and having a spiritual path and having spiritual tools really helped me to open up and find that space that's big enough to hold all of it. And that creates this eye in the storm, even when life is hard. And I want more people to have those tools without having to believe unbelievable things. Because the hard thing about this conversation right now is that we've always been superstitious, and evolution has rewarded us for being superstitious. And before, it wasn't a problem because all of our tribes are separate. Who cares that they're all worshiping different gods, because it's all helping them with communal bonding in various ways. But now in the modern world, our truths are bumping into each other, and it's actually really a problem. We're not able to have kind of modern collective solutions to things because we can't converge on some kind of reality, because we're all playing our imaginary games with our, imaginary beings. And so I want more people to have access to the tools that have helped me to develop that room within that we can point to, but you can't give someone, but you can point to without having to pay the cost of believing unbelievable things that we just can't support in the 21st century.
You made me I had to pull out a tissue while you were talking and do this. And
yes.
I'll never forgive you for that, Britt, because, as a guy feeling things, no, thank you. Not into it. I love it. I'm joking. Man, I think everything you just said and that story about the hospital is all you need to hear to understand what is on offer when human suffering is met with the unbounded compassion that arises from knowing this moment the way that you can. That's on offer. And that's what you're helping point to for people. And that's why I was so grateful that you agreed to talk and you replied to my email. And your book is No Nonsense Spirituality, and we'll put a link to it because I think that's actually, there it is. Hey, wait, no, yeah, show it again.
No Nonsense Spirituality, all the tools, no faith required. If I could just go over the chapters real quick. I have
please.
Secular Spirituality, Order and Chaos, which we touched on a little bit, The Science of Rituals, Awe and Contemplation, Awakening the Feminine that we talked about a little bit, Meaning and Purpose, Secular Morality, Intuition and the Occult, Mysticism and Wisdom Traditions, Community and Love, Sacred Story, Human Flourishing, and the Future of Spirituality. And I really tried to pack into each one helpful tools for if you're coming from religion, if you never had religion, if you have some kind of religion, but you're trying to sort out what you want to keep and what you want to kind of let go of. And at the end of each chapter are kind of journal or discussion questions where you can ask yourself questions and really kind of go through it almost like a workbook to be able to develop tools that fit your life and fit you. And so it's one of those things that I can't give you your spiritual path. I can't say, here are your 12 steps to your perfect life. But we can point to some of these things, give you the science behind some of these things, give you the stories behind some of these things, and help you kind of turn within and develop your own. And I hope that I was able to do that with this book.
Oh man, I can't wait to check it out because I've been going through a thing and haven't had a chance. But I tell you, like what you're doing is beautiful. And the minute I saw it on Instagram, there's like a knowing, like an energetic knowing, like, oh my God, that's a thing that's needed. And my hope is that, we can get the conversation out even more widely than you already have on your massive platform. I love that you are able to do TikTok because it's something that I haven't been able to figure out. So I've just kind of let it be. But man,
I'm a little old for it, but I had knee surgery. I tore my ACL and I had scoured everything on the internet. And I was like, well, that's it. That's everything on the internet. Let me check what the kids are doing on TikTok. But I found out that it was a great place to connect with other people who think about these things, and was almost surprised to find that there were people even open to the idea of an atheist spiritual director. And so, yeah, I've been hanging out on TikTok as far as I'm legally able to. We'll see what happens with it. But yeah, you can check out my website, nononsensespirituality.com. And I hang out on TikTok from time to time, and I do some coaching. I have some courses. I have a nihilism course on my website, feminine spirituality course on my website, spiritual reconstruction, faith deconstruction. I have some courses that really pack in a lot of the tools that I work with clients. And then I do hope that my book is helpful for people, not because it's an achievement, not because it's meaningful or it's going to be a book that's going to last the generations or any kind of thing, but really just because I enjoyed the journey and it was the book that I needed at various stages of my spiritual journey. And so it's been a joy for me to be able to put together and hopefully be able to, it gives me meaning and purpose, hoping that I can help others who got stuck in some of the same places that I got stuck.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I can't wait to talk again if you're willing.
Yeah.
And at some point we should really try to do it in person because I think it would be just next level crazy. We can go deep on any of the things we started to talk about here. But, and then, so I'll give my quick pitch for our stuff so that, hey, if you guys like any of this stuff, the best thing you can do to get Britt's message out is share the video, just hit like, leave a comment. If you're listening on the podcast, leave a review and subscribe to the podcast. It helps a lot. The ZDoggMD show. All of that juices these mysterious algorithms that then allow this kind of thing. If you think it's worth sharing, allow this kind of thing to get out in the world. I'm a passionate fan of Britt's now, and from the minute I saw her first video, and I'm just so thrilled that you were able to spend quite a bit of your time with me. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'm so appreciative. And just to second that, one of the things that is always hard with secular spirituality is because we don't have a shared myth the shared myth or the dogma creates the tithing, creates the money and the resources and the buildings and if secular spirituality, if we're not able to be supported for the work that we do, then religion by definition wins. Something like Mormonism, I mean, has so much money, has so much power, and so I used to really shy away from being able to ask for support or likes or things like that on social media because it feels kind of icky and you don't want to be one of those people that is just out there for likes. But it was Bart Campolo of the Humanize Me podcast who changed my mind about it, saying, hey, if we are actually going to be able to offer better tools for people than what religions offer, then we actually have to be able to be supported for what we do and the education that we've had and the retreats that we've done and the all of, the 10,000 hours that we've put in, that we do need to value that work. So if you enjoy Z-Dog and his voice, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please support it in whatever way that you can. It's actually one of the ways that we do shift the conversation away from really religion being the only game in town.
I love it. That's beautifully put. Yeah, it is important to, and hey, believe me, no one's getting, we were talking about this, the last thing we can end with. No one's getting rich in this way, right? Like this is not a way to get rich.
There's not as much money in atheist spirituality as you would think.
Nope. There's definitely, I tell you, I during COVID, if I talked about COVID, you could generate a ton of ad revenue, get supporters, all that. It is not the same with this conversation because you're basically saying you have to die. You're going to go through all this burning kind of hellish experience. And then on the other side will be this thing that we can't really talk about directly, but trust us, it's great. That's not a great sales pitch.
It's a tough sell when everybody else is like, but I know the way and I know the truth and here's your path. Right. And that's so enticing. So I don't have as good of a sales pitch as some of that, but I can say that it's so wholesome to not have to turn off your brain in order to get these tools, because that's always what we have to do in some aspects of religion and spirituality. Is you're never going to fully be whole if you have to turn off the rational part of your brain. That's part of you too. And so there's not a lot of money in it, but support it any way that you can so that we at least are able to get tools out there for people who really need it.
Yeah, because we were talking before, joking and thinking, if we wanted to be the next Jay Shetty or the next Deepak Chopra or the next whoever, it would be so easy because we kind of understand how cults work and how religion works and how this sense of community can be built. And then all you got to do is do this, flip a few switches, and you and I together, we would crush it. Like we could sell all hella merchandise, crystals, all kinds of,
That's true. I get lots of requests, even on TikTok, saying, like, if you started a cult, like, I know what you say to avoid cults, but I'd totally join.
Totally join it.
And the problem is that if you're a nihilist, then getting more money in a bigger house, it just is meaning. I mean, it
doesn't mean anything. Yeah, that's the problem. And when you've gone on that journey, like, I did the medicine thing, like I generated revenue. It's like, when you realize how empty it is ultimately, like there's a certain amount you need for Maslow's hierarchy to be safe. And then after that, it's just torture, it's suffering. And the last thing I forgot to mention is the grief component of the whole process. We talked about grief, but the grief of losing the moorings that you have, whether it's leaving religion or leaving your self-structure and identity that you thought was real, there's a true grief, a true, deep, profound sense of loss, sadness, of falling away. And you can honor and experience that fully. Just expect that it's there, that it'll come, that it's okay. It may not always show up in the same way, but people get very disconcerted. They feel like they've gone wrong in some way. But in reality, it's another sign that things are going as they go.
But if you, like you say, though, if you go through that totally alone, you do feel like you're dying and becoming even maybe psychotic. And I had this really viral TikTok one time where I talked about this feeling that a lot of people have that they've gone too far. Like I've deconstructed too much, like I've seen too much and I can't come back. And the more that we can put language to this, and you can hear other people who have gone through it, and you can gather tools, and you can really just putting the language to it so that you're not the only person who feels like they're out of the Matrix. Because that's how we all feel whenever we watch the Matrix or we hear Plato's Cave. We always think, I'm the only one outside of the Matrix. I'm
That's
the only
right. It's
one
very lonely.
Yeah. And really there's something so human about it, and that there's other people around you who are craving honesty, who want to have this kind of conversation with you. And so putting language to that and having these conversations and taking more risks into authenticity, because you shouldn't have to go through this totally alone. Because I really went through it alone. I didn't have a single person in my life that I could have had this conversation with. And I really thought that I was going crazy. And that's something, some suffering is unavoidable, but that kind of suffering is avoidable. Like, you don't have to make up words and experiences and stories and parables and all of that just completely by yourself, because others have gone through this too, and there's tools that can help.
Beautifully said. And actually, like, so my friend Simon Brown talks about this in terms of trauma. Like, don't think you can do that alone. You need someone who's specifically trained in that can help you on that aspect of it. And turning to a non-duality teacher to process your incredibly complex PTSD is probably not the right way to do it. So it's also which help you get, who you turn to. For me, I've been blessed because I've been surrounded by wonderful, brilliant people like yourself and others that I've met over the years. And again, one of the side effects of having a platform that was built for something else is now there's enough clout that I can actually have conversation with people. It feels a little cheat codey, but at the same time, if I can share it with others and just create a kind of sense of openness and authenticity, then I think we're doing the right thing. But Britt, so awesome. So we'll talk hopefully again soon. Thank you again for sharing your wisdom. All the links will be in the show notes, and we're out.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love the conversation, and thank you for supporting me on your platform. I think your platform's probably one of the biggest that I've been on, and so I really appreciate you sharing all that work that your ego did in earlier stages of life so that I could let people enjoy this conversation, hopefully. So thank you so much.
If I could, I'd just give you the keys to the whole thing and you could just have it and do what you do, because I think it's so helpful. Yeah, no, it'll mess you up. Believe me, look at me. Look at my face. Does this look like someone who's normal? No. Oh, thanks, Britt. Peace.
Oh, thank you so much. Bye.